The 2000s gave us some of the most memorable Heisman winners we've ever seen. There was the quarterback who reshaped what a Heisman season could even look like, one of the most electrifying players to ever touch a football, a quarterback who put up stats that were hard to comprehend, and even a 28-year-old former baseball player putting on a show down in Tallahassee. But not all these Heisman seasons were created equally. While some decisions felt obvious, others were decided by just a few votes and are still argued about decades later.
Does anyone remember that Mark Ingram won the Heisman in 2009?
So today, we're looking back at every Heisman winner from the 2000s, but we're not looking at their entire college career or what happened to them in the NFL. We're strictly focusing on their actual Heisman season, looking at that season's production, how dominant they felt that year, and what moments made them feel unforgettable. Ultimately, we'll decide which years were legendary, which years were solid, and which years probably could have gone to someone else.
Congrats to him for winning the Heisman. I would think Larry Fitzgerald was a better player, though.
But first, let's revisit each Heisman winner's season, starting with Chris Weinke. We all know he's the oldest to ever win the award, which has brought its fair share of jokes.
There is always little jokes here and there, the old grandpa jokes and stuff like that. And I tell him all the time, I got the last laugh.
But like he said, he's the one who got the last laugh, because after leading the Seminoles to the title game the year before, his encore was throwing for over 4,100 yards with 33 touchdowns and 11 picks. Not only did he sling it all over the field, but he also played with a chip on his shoulder. His fearlessness did lead to some picks, but also some incredible big-time, game-changing throws. The only thing he was missing was that iconic Heisman moment, which he almost had in the fourth quarter against the Canes, but we all know how that one ended. Nevertheless, it was a special season that ended with a second straight title appearance for the Seminoles. But unlike Weinke, the next year brought us a different quarterback entirely, because in 2001, Eric Crouch was a problem out of the backfield. Just rewatch his touchdown run against Missouri, and it's easy to see how special he was in the open field. In total, he'd go for over 1,100 yards on the ground with 18 touchdowns. And out of all these Heisman winners, he may have the most memorable moment. Now, we all know he wasn't the best passer, only throwing for just over 1,500 yards with 7 touchdowns and 10 picks. However, back in 2001, Nebraska's option offense didn't ask him to be the greatest passer, but it did demand him to basically be their entire offensive engine. And he was an engine that carried them all the way to a national championship. But Carson Palmer's Heisman in 2002 ended up changing the sport. His season was the fuse that lit college football's next great dynasty. And if we look back, his performance was one of the best of the entire run. He did have some early slip-ups to Kansas State and then a brutal overtime loss to Washington State. But after that, he went on a tear, including a nearly 450-yard 5-touchdown game against Oregon and a 425-yard 4-touchdown performance against Notre Dame that solidified the Heisman for him. This run honestly had USC looking like the most dangerous team in the country by the end of the year, and in total gave him over 3,900 yards with 33 touchdowns and 10 picks, which was enough to give him a sizable 200-vote win over Iowa star Brad Banks. But for as good as Carson played in 2002, Jason White's stats the following year were equally as impressive, because White threw for 40 touchdowns and nearly as many yards, with some games that were truly remarkable. Take his Texas game, for instance, where he had as many touchdowns as incompletions, or the insane 77-point blowout over A&M, where he only had 2 incompletions while tossing 5 touchdowns in the first half. But what's most impressive is what White had to overcome to even get to 2003, because he didn't have to rehab just one knee injury, but had to fight through 2 devastating ones in back-to-back years, only to come back and lead his team to a national title appearance while beating out both Eli Manning and Larry Fitzgerald for the Heisman. Yet, unlike White, whose season didn't quite have the best ending, our next winner had as much of a dream season one could ask for, because not only did Matt Leinart throw 5 touchdowns to win the national championship, but he also did it against the 2 guys who challenged him for the Heisman. And that wasn't his only big-time performance. There was his 3-touchdown outing to kick the season off against the Hokies, his 4-touchdown performance against 15th-ranked Arizona State, and another 5-touchdown outing against Notre Dame in a game that, just like Palmer, likely secured him the Heisman. In total, he tossed 33 touchdowns touchdowns, 8 picks, and go for over 3,300 yards on the year. But for as good as Leinart was playing, it's hard not to think how much he benefited from the X factor behind him. In the following year, that man took the Heisman from Leinart, because in 2005, Reggie Bush turned into a cheat code. Coming out of the backfield, he was making defenders miss left and right. Out on the perimeter, he'd run right past corners, and returning punts, he was one of the best in the country. In total, he'd go for nearly 2,900 yards and 19 touchdowns. But what separated Reggie were the moments. How could we forget the infamous Bush push and the game-breaking touchdowns he scored before it, or his iconic front flip touchdown against UCLA, and his otherworldly 513-yard performance against Fresno State. All these moments ultimately being why his name was called at the end of the year. Yet for as good of a season Reggie had, even his season didn't produce a Heisman victory like in 2006, because the next year, Troy Smith received the second highest percentage of Heisman votes in the history of the award. He may not have been as electric as Reggie, but when we go back, he had an impressive year. It started off getting revenge over second-ranked Texas, took off with a 15-touchdown, 0-interception month of October, and culminated with a legendary performance against his bitter rivals in the game of the century, ultimately giving him a season with over 2,700 yards, 31 touchdowns, and only 6 picks. But we all know how that season ended for Smith, whereas a star freshman on the other side ended up redefining what a Heisman season could even look like 1 year later, because in 2007, Tim Tebow entered another stratosphere. In total, he'd go for more than 4,100 yards and an incredible 55 touchdowns, with games that had some insane stat lines, like his 427-yard performance against Ole Miss, or him single-handedly taking out a top 10 Kentucky team. But his performance against South Carolina takes the cake, a game in which he threw for over 300 yards, rushed for another 120, and scored a jaw-dropping 7 total touchdowns, almost certainly putting the cherry on top of his Heisman campaign. And while Tebow was a finalist the next year, Sam Bradford ended up getting in the way of history, because in 2008, he was dealing as Oklahoma's quarterback. He was the engine to the Sooner offense, and they were historic. In their 12 regular season games, they only scored less than 40 points twice, while scoring more than 60 points an incredible 4 times. And just like White, Bradford had his own share of ridiculous stat lines, like his near-perfect performance against Texas Tech, or when he incompleted only 3 passes while setting a school record, ultimately producing a season with over 4,700 yards, 55 touchdowns, and only 8 interceptions. And while everyone was excited for the encore, Bradford was taken out before halftime of the first game. In his place ran in a 5'9" stud who was ready to take his throne, because Mark Ingram, our 2009 winner, came out firing. He started the year with an announcement game against Virginia Tech before taking off in October as he dropped 146 yards on Kentucky, added another 188 against Ole Miss, and then took over with 269 yards against South Carolina. But his most memorable moment had to be against Florida, where he took over in the SEC championship to get the Tide back in the title game. Ultimately, he finished the year with just under 2,000 total yards and 20 touchdowns, and somehow, in all of Alabama's great history, became the first Tide player to hoist the trophy. So with that, we land back on the main question: where do all these winners stack up? To help us rank them, we're going to split them up into 4 tiers. And kicking us off is the 2001 winner. Now, personally, I think Crouch's year catches a bit too much hate. Like we saw when you go back, he was a legitimate game changer, and he did it as basically the exclusive offensive threat for Nebraska. He carried their option game, had his iconic moment against the defending champs, and ultimately led the Cornhuskers to a title appearance. But we also can't ignore the limitations. His total production was one of the lowest of the group, with his passing numbers in particular hard to defend, even as an option quarterback. And like you'll see throughout this ranking, the ending has to matter, because after getting blasted by Colorado and missing out on the Big 12 title, Nebraska still backed into the national championship, only to get rolled pulled again by Miami. So Crouch was memorable and has a Heisman case, but definitely lands in the 4th tier. Next to him is 2009's winner, Mark Ingram. Now, this is another one that still carries debates. And honestly, I think Ingram doesn't get enough credit for what he did. Yes, Alabama was overflowing with talent by 2009, but ultimately, he was their physical, efficient engine that drove that offense and had some key moments across the season. Not to mention, he sealed the deal with a strong performance in the title game. But there's a few things that challenge Ingram's case, production being the first, as he's the only player on the list to gain less than 2,000 yards. Compared to the only other back on the list, he gained nearly 1,000 less yards. Second, it's fair to question if he was even the best running back that year, because Toby Gerhart lost to Ingram by inches and put up over 2,000 yards and 28 touchdowns. And let's not forget about Ndamukong Suh, who most people would say was the most dominant player that year. So while Ingram was great, his season lands on the 4th tier compared to the others. But unlike Ingram, Jason White has one of the most impressive production campaigns on the list. Back in 2003, he threw for over 3,800 yards with 41 touchdowns and only 10 picks. In fact, his 41 touchdowns are only second to Sam Bradford. And for the first 3 months of 2003, he had the Sooners destroying people. We saw the beatdown he put on a talented Texas team before almost shutting down the A&M program. And on top of this all, he's got to have the greatest comeback story of all time. But on this list, there may not be a worse ending. And that matters, because his last 2 games were downright awful. In the shocker against Kansas State, he had 298 passing yards, no touchdowns, 2 picks, and a 54% completion percentage. Then, against LSU in the title game, he was even worse, barely passing 100 passing yards, no touchdowns, 2 picks, and a 35% completion percentage. Combined with the debate on if Larry should have been the one holding the trophy, and it's hard to put White above the 4th tier. Rounding out the bottom tier is 2000 winner Chris Wanke. And while Wanke's Heisman vote was close, I actually think this season holds up better than most people remember. Outside of Bradford's insane 2008 season, Wanke threw for more yards than any other winner from the decade. And controversial or not, he did leave Florida State back to the national championship. But there are a few things that keep him in tier 4. And no, I'm not talking about his age. First, he had the most interceptions and the lowest completion percentage of the true quarterbacks. Second, he didn't really have that one defining Heisman moment, even though he came close in the Miami game. And third, just like Jason White, the ending matters, because in the national championship game against Oklahoma, Wanke and Florida State couldn't get anything going. He had a 49 completion percentage, 2 picks, 0 touchdowns, and barely surpassed 250 yards. So while his season absolutely deserves respect, a combination of turnovers, no signature moment, and a rough ending keeps him from climbing out of the bottom tier. But now on to tier 3, where we start off with Troy Smith, who had one of the cleanest wins of the decade. And if this ranking was based on the Heisman vote, Troy would probably make a case for the top spot, because in 2006, he ran away with the award. Like we saw, he kicked the season off with a bang against Texas, had the top team in the country breezing through their schedule, and had that legendary moment against Michigan in one of the biggest games in the sport's history. Yet compared to the names still ahead, he didn't have the almost video game-like production. While he did have 31 touchdowns and only 6 picks, his 2,700 total yards is towards the bottom. And that ending against Florida is definitely as bad as it gets. So for as clean of a win as he had, it's a middle tier season compared to the rest. Next to Smith lands 2002 winner Carson Palmer. If Troy had the cleanest vote in this tier, Palmer may have the season that aged the best. Back in 2002, he threw for nearly 4,000 yards and 33 touchdowns. And it wasn't just the numbers, but also the way he finished. From mid-October on, he was on fire, going for 25 touchdowns and only 4 picks. Then on senior night against 10-win rival Notre Dame, he had that Heisman caliber performance, only to follow it up with a 300-yard performance to beat the man who challenged him for the award. So while the season wasn't insane enough to reach the top, it was one of the strongest on the list, and ultimately a season that ended up launching a dynasty. Wrapping up our tier 3 is fellow USC quarterback Matt Leinart, which feels right, because if Palmer was the beginning of USC's takeover, Leinart was the quarterback standing at the peak of it. Yes, his production doesn't jump off the page like some of the others, but was there really a more perfect season? Because USC in 2004 was at the pinnacle of the sport, and he was their surgical general leading them. He had over 36 touchdowns and only 6 picks, as USC bulldozed through the 5th toughest strength of schedule that year. He had USC go wire to wire as the #1 team in the country, had his own Heisman game against Notre Dame, and had that perfect ending with his 5-touchdown performance in USC's 55-19 demolition over Oklahoma. Now again, the production wasn't insane, and it's very fair to debate if he was even the best player on his own team, which is why he closes us out in Tier 3. But from here on out, we're moving into video game territory, and there's not a better way to start than with Sam Bradford's 2008 season, because from a pure production standpoint, he is one of the strongest arguments in this entire video. Let's go back to the stats. His 4,700 passing yards and 50 passing touchdowns rank near the top across all of Heisman history, and the offense he led is considered one of the greatest of all time. Like we saw, they averaged over 50 a game against the toughest strength of schedule that year, and after their Texas loss, they basically scored 60 points in every single game. On top of that, this wasn't an easy race. Colt McCoy was almost perfect at Texas. Tim Tebow was trying to become the first repeat winner since Archie Griffin, and yet Bradford still ended the season holding the trophy. Even with all the pressure on him during Oklahoma's Big 12 championship appearance, he went to Arrowhead and hung nearly 400 yards on the Tigers. And although they lost to Florida, he had a solid performance in the title game. But for as good of a season he had, it still falls just shy of these two legends at the top, because both Reggie Bush and Tim Tebow were truly legendary players. On one side, we had the most electrifying player of the decade, and on the other, a player who revolutionized the quarterback position. Honestly, you can make the case for either. Back in 2005, Reggie was must-see TV. Every time the ball was in his hands, the game hung in the balance. He downright took over games. Down by 3 scores against Arizona State, no problem. Reggie rips off 2 big runs to lead the comeback. In an absolute dogfight against Notre Dame, Reggie goes for 3 touchdowns, nearly 200 yards, and ensures the game-winning touchdown gets pushed across the goal line. And all of this doesn't even stack up to him single-handedly beating Fresno State before doing almost the same exact thing 1 week later against UCLA. Yes, he had that brutal mistake in the title game and got outshined by Vince Young, who went superhuman. But in totality, Reggie unquestionably had the moments and had the production across multiple phases of the game. Yet even for as dynamic as he was, Tebow's Heisman season sits on a level by itself, because in 2007, he was truly historic. Up until now, we talked about passers throwing it all over the field and runners gashing right through defenses. Well, in 2007, Tebow gave us the best of both worlds. If you go to his game log and just look, it's like he was the best quarterback and running back rolled into one. The year was revolutionary. He was the first player ever to throw for over 3,000 yards and rush for over 800 yards in the same year. He became the first player in NCAA history to record 20+ passing touchdowns and 20+ rushing touchdowns in the same year. Those 23 rushing touchdowns also broke the all-time SEC single-season record for any position, surpassing the previous record, which, well, was of course held by running backs. And he did all this as a true sophomore, becoming the first one ever to win the award. Was it a perfect season? Of course not. Florida had 4 losses, and Darren McFadden was a real threat, probably winning in any other year. But when we look across all the 2000 winners, it's hard to say there was a better Heisman season. With that said, I want to know what you think. What's your pyramid look like? Who are you taking at the top spot? And if you love reliving college football classics, I think you'll enjoy this next video up on the screen now.